Uh,
Yeah, so I wonder why you chose to start the book with that, that 2016 kind of like moment in time, with gigs and just like, you know, rap is on its way up. It's winning the awards and etc.
yeah, I think that was like such a it was so hard to know where to start a book. That was like probably one of the hard of the writing processes, where to actually start, especially with nonfiction, because I guess it needs to set the tone
Hmm.
for what's to follow in that sense. And so that was I think the intro was the last thing I wrote.
Oh wow.
So I was really searching for what matches the mood of the book. Like the book kind of takes us through that history from the rise to the boom and then legacy of the music, but what captures that kind of movement in most cleanly and most precisely.
Hmm.
So I went with Gigs because Gigs is an artist from South London. He's kind of held as like one of the, I guess, I would say like kind of like the godfather of UK rap in that sense. He didn't
Hmm.
start, but he's
Yeah.
so well established and his music means so much to so many people that he is like held as like he is a legend of the genre, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Mm, I knew that in his story, from me myself growing up listening to him, I've been listening to him since I was legit like 15.
Hmm.
So I've
Hmm.
seen his rise from like some of these DVDs to then
Hmm.
making music videos, and then from there to actually starting to make a little bit of money from his career, then actually exploding into fully fledged
Yeah.
musician. And especially because there wasn't, I guess, UK rap wasn't like American rap, where a lot of the money really only came in the past 9 years or so. So a lot
Hmm.
of us working essentially for free for a long time, and
Yeah.
it was like a real big example of that. And so I knew his story was emblematic of the rise of the genres in that sense. And so I was like, okay, when I was really thinking about what moments had I, what moments were impactful in the music culture and in British rap culture and in Black British culture,
Hmm.
that show came to mind because before then he had been he hadn't been allowed. So I'll set the scene a little. There's that intro starts with they're backstage at his first headline show in London, and they're about to go on stage, and there are loads of musicians backstage who are his friends also,
Hmm.
and then his manager Buck is saying a prayer to, I guess, kind of bless them on the evening before they step out onto stage. And he kind of says in the prayer that there are many of us who started this journey that can't be here today. Some of them are
Hmm.
dead, some of them are in jail. So it's just kind of yeah, a message and a quiet moment before they step out onto stage.
Hmm.
And I was actually in the crowd that day, so
Okay.
I'd been waiting to see Gigs perform for literally a decade, but
Hmm.
uh, that a lot of the time the police didn't let him perform. He got kind of blackballed a lot. There was a lot of issues with the Metropolitan Police who wouldn't let him perform in London, and he had to go to all of these extremes to even perform shows outside of London. So I thought when he actually got to perform, it felt like such a special moment to see some of these songs that we'd lived with for so long actually live in
Hmm.
the flesh for the first time, and I
Yeah.
think that really captured the moment nicely. So I thought that would probably be the best and most powerful place to start with to show that, um, yeah, this isn't just about because I don't actually talk about the show itself. I talk about everything that
Hmm.
happened backstage. So I guess was a good way to start in terms of saying this isn't going to be a traditional history of UK rap, and we'll
Right.
talk about this happened and this happened and this happened. I'm really trying to show you like the inner lives of the individuals who have paved kind of the way in these
Hmm.
genres.
Yeah, definitely the great very poetic phrase from that little piece is quote sound emerges out of fire. Just talking about UK rap and grime in general and specifically to gigs. Um I'd love to know about some of the forebears of like grime. Like you talk about like Jamaican sound system
Mm,
and all like I don't know, probably four or five times in the book, and I've seen it a lot of times too. Is that there's always a big deal made out of like the BPMs, like beats per minute for grime,
yeah,
like
yeah,
140, I want to say, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So like, I mean, is that just to really make it clear that it's like a much faster? Like, I don't know that I've ever like being, I think a hip hop head. I don't know that I could even come close to what the beats per minute is like in, kind of normal
Uh,
rap, if that even exists. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
So I wonder about the importance of that. Is that just really like what sets it apart? Is just that it's so like fast?
That's really interesting. I'd never actually thought about it in that sense that
Huh.
me must have been a fan of US hip hop. I don't know the BPM, but when you
Right.
listening to grime growing up, that was just something that you just knew that grime was 140 BPM. I think it'd be
Hmm.
stated in a lot of the interviews, and I think maybe would be. I don't even know why, but that was just such a prevalent kind of characteristic of the music is like the kind of
Okay.
double speed. And I
Yeah.
think that's actually filtered into UK rap as well, because a lot of the UK rappers, a lot of them are grime MCs first, especially the older generation,
Mm.
and they rap quite double time too. And even UK drill is the thing that separates UK drill from US drill is that the instrumentals are a lot quicker, and I think that took a lot of influence from grime as well. I
Okay.
think where maybe that comes from is that yeah, I talk a lot about Jamaican sound system culture in the book because I guess where the first and second chapter of the book look at, I guess, the entry point of Black people into the United Kingdom, essentially. And that started with a generation which is called like the Windrush generation,
Mm-hmm.
which Rush is like one of the first. The HMT Windrush was a boat that came from Jamaica to the UK and brought like a lot of the first Caribbean immigrants to the UK in the 50s. I think it was 1948, but in the
Mm-hmm.
40s, 50s, and 60s, like that's when like en masse Caribbean people from and a lot of them from Jamaica started to arrive in the
Mm.
UK after the World War, after the Second World War, and helps kind of rebuild the country in that sense. But
Mm-hmm.
of course, they came, they brought music too, and as they continue to come, they continue to bring music too. So of course, like reggae being very huge, but then when you start to get into sound system culture, that's like when you see the first shoots of like black, specifically black and British high of genres starting to
Mm-hmm.
emerge in that sense. So there are a lot of musicians like Tipper Irie or Smiley Culture who were started to then I guess they call it toasting, which would be
Mm.
they talking over the records, but they'd be talking in British accents for the first time and be talking about
Uh,
British life for the first time. And that is like kind of like the root and stem of like where this all kind of begins, if that makes sense. And
mm-hmm.
from sound systems, of course, been huge in the United Kingdom ever since. Like we have things like Notting Hill Carnival, which is essentially half sound systems, essentially shuts down West London for a whole weekend.
Mm.
Uh, and so a lot of the music roots and stem is there. So then you fast forward maybe, I don't know, a few decades to a genre like grime, where to experience grime, like a lot of the initial innovators of grime, their uncles or their dads or their granddads were sound system operators. So naturally, like that
Mm.
through. So a lot of grime started on pirate radio stations where they're
Mm-hmm.
kind of doing the same thing. They're going back and forth over like a turning selection of instrumentals and whatnot. And I
Yeah.
think in that, like the music was quite fast as they do that. The instrumentals were quite fast as they would do that. And I think that is maybe where the speed comes from.
Yeah.
And I think that's like why the link to sound system culture is so important because it is literally a generational passing down of the baton almost. And
Right.
I guess British migration, they're now like the Black British population is a lot more. There are a lot more ethnicities. So there, of course, like, I'm from West Africa. There's people from East Africa and all of these different places too. But with sound system culture being so prevalent, like a lot of the people then fed into that still.
Hmm. I mean, I would guess you know about like Twista and like Bone Thugs and Harmony.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like I'm
yeah.
trying to think like what their BPM would be, or what the like their rap style, no, like it used to be known as tongue twister, like
Yeah,
that
yeah,
shit,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I'm thinking of one of my students who was a huge like everything I taught Spanish, and he was somehow able to get Chief Keef into everything that was done in the class. So right,
No,
he'd be drill, right?
yeah, yeah. Chief, I think he was one
Okay.
of the originators, right? Yeah, yeah.
Was his music more derivative of UK drill or vice versa?
Vice versa. So I think he
Okay.
was one of the originators. I think people like him, King Louis, in Chicago, and then I know in that was I can't remember even what year that was, but
Mm,
obviously that started to blow up, and then when it kind of jumped across the pond to the UK,
hmm.
first iterations of UK drill were kind of very reminiscent of that, like the big like booming beats and instrumentals.
Yeah.
But then it started to like I guess settle in to the UK. The instrumentals started to change, and then that's when it started to get quite quicker, and you saw
Mm,
some of the influence from grime and from UK rap started to filter in, and yeah, the instrumentals got a lot quicker. So it kind of
yeah.
evolved into its own like subgenre in that sense.
Well, I love the way your repetition in the chapters about like the Windrush generation, which you just mentioned. This is how they arrived here. You
Mm.
have an interesting story about so and so and how he came or how his parents came, and then this is how they arrived here. Really driving home the point for the reader that so many of these individual stories lead to this one, to these big stories. You mentioned the British Nationality Act. I mean, there's the classic, unfortunately, it's all around the world, right? Ideas of like, hey, we need help rebuilding the
Yeah,
country. And then when a scapegoat is needed, oftentimes, right, the immigrants were
yeah,
have been the
yeah,
scapegoats. So you do a great job tracing the history as well. Man, I feel like Cecil Morris, who you talk about like with the pirate radio, maybe he already does. I feel like he needs his own movie or his own book.
Yeah, no, definitely. I would pay to see that, definitely. Yeah.
Man, tell
And
tell
I
us a
don't
little bit about. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, yeah, no, sorry. Yeah, but I can tell you about him. So Cecil Morris, he's from Birmingham, and he was is a Jamaican immigrant, still lives in Birmingham today. And he came in the time of like the Windrush generation when they came into Birmingham, and he essentially started like the the major black pirate radio station in the city, and he started it out of initially just not being able to hear his music anywhere on the radio. I think there were two radio stations at the time in like the 60s and 70s, and they were both, I think, state run. And when he
Hmm.
went to reach them asking like, can you play some reggae? Can we have some DJs on there? They were kind of like kind of shunned him away, laughed at him a bit, and he was like, well, I'm
Hmm.
just gonna start my own station. And he essentially did that. It was called PCRL and became like a huge radio station
Hmm.
um in Birmingham. And I think spread eventually it's ended up spreading out from just like the Caribbean and Black community into other communities too.
Hmm.
But whilst he was doing that, because pirate radio stations are illegal and they were illegal then, so we playing this massive game of cat and mouse with the
Seriously.
DT. Yeah, where the um I guess the organization branch of the government tasked with essentially stopping a lot of these extraterrestrial stopping radio stations. So he would, yes, I think he set up over, I think it was over 500 times he ended up setting up in tower
Oof.
blocks across Birmingham, and
Yeah.
he'd get raided one afternoon, they'd pull his station off air, he'd set up again the next morning, and then the same would happen, and the same would happen, and the same would happen.
Yeah.
But I think, he said he started to notice in the community the radio station was really taking a powerful hold because people would come to him and say, "We finally have our music to play," and
Right.
it would then just be on music. They'd broadcast like funeral dates and all of these really
Mm.
important community aspects to people who maybe couldn't get in touch with relatives or loved ones, and it
Yeah.
became a real linchpin, a real bastion of the community in that sense. So yeah, he's got an
Man.
incredible story. And then to be able to like sit with him and hear that and hear him tell his story,
Yeah.
be able to trace that was really special too, because I think that does show a lot of the lineage of what we've been talking
Mm.
about. You see how connected it is to a lot of those individuals who initially came to Britain.
Yeah, I think you said five. I think it might have been 1,500 you referenced in the book, the amount of times he had to
Yeah,
move. But yeah, I mean, he probably obviously he probably couldn't even count. Like,
yeah, yeah,
right.
yeah.
So I'm trying to figure his generation. So I mean, would he be like in his 70s now, maybe, or
Yeah, I think he's either in his 70s or 80s. Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Yeah. And yeah, you
yeah.
talked about how you wrote about how there were times like in 1981 was seemed like that there were a lot of uprisings
Mm.
and police against police brutality and just poverty, just the way that people in poverty were often treated. And you talk about how you put on the music to calm the nerves, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. I think the radio station started after there was riots in the UK, across the UK in 1981 and 1985. And 1981, there were riots in Handsworth, Birmingham, which was like an epicenter of like the Caribbean
Mm,
community. And a lot of that became out of police brutality. I think England was in recession at the time in general. So there was economic problems, there were social problems, and
mhm,
then racial problems on top of that. And I think, as happens with those time periods, you had people kind of capitalizing on the frustration of the time by then blaming essentially immigrants. So a lot of
mm,
communities were being blamed for a lot of the trouble that was going on
yeah.
in the UK. And then I think also the police, yeah, essentially, yeah, there was a lot of police brutality when you read
Mm,
accounts of this, hear people speak about it. That was a major factor too, people feeling like they were being treated like dirt essentially. And so from that, that kind of laid the kindling for
mm,
the uprisings and riots that happened in 1981. And when that happened, Cecil, his, I guess, motivation was to stop the young people in the community going out to join
mhm,
and calm their nerves. So he started to play music from his first pirate radio station from his bedroom.
mm, mhm.
And the station grew and grew and grew. And then 1985, riots came back to Birmingham and he did the same thing again. And I think after that, then people started to write him saying, like, we really need this station. Like, I have
Yeah.
who's a DJ. Can you teach him how to DJ? I have a son who does X, Y, Z. And so you really see like the role that the station played in the community and not just on a musical
Mm,
level.
definitely. I might embarrass myself with this British reference here, but like this idea of him, setting up and then the police would come and raid it and like almost like a Benny Hill episode, no?
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Cat and mouse, man.
yeah. Cat and mouse, essentially.
Dude. So interesting. The book kind of goes on a little bit more to So Solid.
Mm.
Like I'm thinking of like Wu-Tang Clan or something like that, but even the Wu-Tang Clan didn't have like 30 in the crew like you talked
Yeah,
about, right?
yeah.
And so like in around 2001, they were winning some big awards. They were really making a name for themselves. Would you call that garage at the time or
Yeah,
their
yeah, that's
style?
like, yeah, yeah. I think over here we call it garage, but
Okay.
say, yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, it was garage, like UKG or garage as it's called.
Uh-huh.
In that there was like the dark, so like garage in general was like quite upbeat. I wouldn't say necessarily uplifting, but kind of party and club music essentially. Like
Uh-huh.
people would party, and there's a lot of R&B samples in there, that
Yeah,
kind of thing. But then So Solid's take on garage was like slightly darker in a sense. Like
right.
a lot of instrumentals were darker, and they're essentially talking about street life, essentially, like which
Hmm.
you hadn't necessarily heard in garage at that time. And I think that's where you start to see the influence from US hip hop even more because um yeah, that comparison to the Wu-Tang is interesting because that's what the Wu-Tang were doing, social commentary essentially
Hmm.
on music, and that's what So Solid were doing. And I think they where the instrumentals start to get darker and maybe a tiny bit more open for MCs to be able to vocalize over them,
Right.
yeah, they could then have full on verses. Whereas before garage was more about like choruses and hooks and sweet choruses, and
Mm,
there isn't that much space for an MC to really talk at length. It's more about keeping the music going and making sure the atmosphere in the club stays up,
mm,
if that makes sense. Whereas like the darker end of garage, which So Solid were doing, was less space for rapping essentially, and you see like that's where the
yeah.
influence from rap really comes in, and they're talking about
Mm,
yeah, up in South London throughout the late 90s, early noughties is
yeah.
essentially what music is. And yeah, but it blows up, they become huge. Like they were like one of the biggest groups growing up, from even when I was growing up, from what when I
Hmm.
remember, like they had number one records. All of this stuff was quite unheard of. And they said they broke a lot of ground and broke a lot of barriers in that sense, and were kind of the precursor to grime and UK rap. Today, when you speak to a lot of the older generation of grime
Mm,
MCs and UK rappers, um, and you ask them who was that beacon of a music career even being possible, a lot of them will mention So Solid because of
mm.
that journey.
Yeah. As the book goes on, you get into Despo, who you'd referenced a little bit earlier, and it's pretty cool because he almost, I think the second to last chapter is about him, so he kind of bookends the book in some ways. Just about in the West Midlands and Grimes' beginnings. It's interesting. I kind of maybe 15 years later, but like how you talk about like So Sol with like their darker music,
Mm.
about how this kind of it kind of parallels like the US, like maybe gangster rap in the late 80s and 90s.
Yeah,
Ice
yeah.
Cube talked about it being like the music like CNN for the hood. I don't know if I'm saying that exactly right, but
I
just
remember.
like but yeah, and the 80s it was a lot of like boom boom bap and mostly not, or not all, but like very like upbeat. But
Yeah, yeah.
just but doesn't mean that the what came later was wrong. It was just more honest, right? More raw.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think a reflection when you hear about the stories
Reflection.
of Birmingham was like in the 90s and the
Hmm.
noughties, it definitely sounds like the music was a reflection of what was
Uh-huh.
happening.
Yeah.
They had like a really dark period in terms of, I think people talk about in the book there was like a crack epidemic, again,
Hmm.
like troubles in the UK and all of these things. And I think the music reflected the harshness of what was going on at the time,
Hmm.
especially but across the UK too. So I feel like Desperate, he was someone that came in, I guess, at the end of Garage as
Mm,
Grime started, as Grime was starting, and that's where he kind of picks up the baton in the region.
mm,
It's like a new genre is kind of being birthed out of the old genre, and grime is a lot darker than garage.
yeah.
The instrumentals are a lot darker, faster as well, and then the content of the music that the MCs are talking about again is tends to be a lot more focused on like what was going on in like the streets and stuff like that, as opposed
Mm.
to necessarily like, yeah, grime wasn't necessarily made for clubs in the same way that garage was. So yeah, yeah.
For some reason, I'm picturing Shine right now. You remember Shine?
Yeah, yeah,
Just like,
yeah.
I mean, one of like his, I can't remember the name of his, I remember like his first song just blew up, but like, New York, and he has roots in, I want to say Belize, right?
Yeah,
Like the
yeah, yeah,
Caribbean,
yeah.
but just dark, but like that New York City kind of vibe. But I wonder about how much of like he was inspired by, let's say, the Caribbean and vice versa,
Mm,
and grime and how all those come together. Um, but yeah, so you go on and talk about South Wales and
mm.
Phil and Dell and like the Asteroid Boys, right?
Yeah,
and just
yeah.
really you map such a you do such an incredible job mapping just like the immigrant cultures plural and the way that so much of it is like a seafaring thing that people came from Libya and Greece and Cyprus and all these other countries. I want to say Eritrea or Somalia.
Mm.
A lot of it kind of like a mariner thing, and how they feel very much left out of um you know, British, I don't know, the economically forgotten peoples in many ways,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I think you do a great job too, just really describing the physical geography of the place, and I really feel like I got to know it. Was South Wales kind of foreign to you as well, or is that something you knew pretty well before you did this reporting?
Yeah, no, South Wales was completely foreign to me
Yeah.
before. I think I'd been to Wales once as a kid. There's like a mountain range in Wales called Snowdonia, which like you may get to go to on a school trip or something. But
Uh,
yeah, Wales was completely foreign to me, which was
mm,
took the longest to report on and took the most research because I didn't really know the genesis of those things. Whereas like in London and Birmingham, I knew like the Windrush generation is such a thing that
sure.
growing up that it wasn't that hard to then access what I needed to find out. Whereas
Hmm.
Wales is completely foreign to me. I didn't a lot of the stuff in the book I didn't know until until I spoke
Yeah.
to them. As you say, like it starts with talking about the history of migration into Wales and Wales having one of the oldest black and ethnic communities in the UK because of it's right by the sea, it's right by the docks. So
Hmm.
have a lot of immigrants come in off the boats when the boats had gone to Africa or the Caribbean or to other parts of Europe to I guess trade. I think it was iron there and steel they were trading from like the
Mm,
South Valleys and coal mines and that they had. So they were kind of shipping those overseas, and then when their boats would refill on the other end, seamen from all of these different countries would then jump on board and come back, and then some of them just settled in Wales, and that's like a
hmm.
big genesis of why there's like some of these small pockets of really diverse communities of Greek people, Somali, Yemeni, Nigerian, Jamaican, Bayesian, all of these different people.
Mm,
And finding that out was fascinating because it kind of reframed my idea of British history in that way too. Um, and
mm,
then it also showed, I guess, showed just how connected the music is to the history of the land. And you say thank you for talking about the land in that way, because that was a big thing. I really wanted people to see and
yeah.
feel the land, and not just maybe experience it through music, but to really understand like the geography of the place and how big an
Mm,
influence it has on the music itself and how big a influence like British soil literally has on British rap. So
mm,
that was definitely a big part of it too. And I
mm,
think because Wales is such a picturesque, beautiful country, and
yeah.
Cardiff in particular has like the capital of Wales. Cardiff is the capital of Wales, but it's by the sea, so it has like a city, but it's by the sea. But then it has these mountain ranges, just maybe a not far drive outside of Cardiff at all. Then it
Mm,
has these valleys, so it has like everything in like this span of like maybe 40 minutes. So I
mm,
really want to bring some of that in because it is such a unique place, and occupies such a unique place in British history.
mm. I'm very much tied into my Italian background. Like I've visited cities where my family's from and that kind of thing. We're in touch with relatives. But like I
Yeah.
have a little bit of Cornish background,
Oh,
Cornwall,
right. Yeah,
which
yeah.
I grew up for years thinking it was part of Wales, but it's not, right?
Yeah, no, Cornwall's a different part of England. It's like
Yeah.
Cornwall's like quite interesting in that a lot of what I was trying to hit in the book kind of is represented in the little I know about Cornish history, where
Mm,
even now in Cornwall, Cornish is like its own identity
right.
in out slightly separate to being English or being British. Like Cornish
Okay.
is its own thing, and it has. I think
Mm,
there's a Cornish language still. There's obviously Cornish food,
mm,
uh, and it has like a real strong sense of identity within like a wider country.
mm, mm.
That's kind of what I wanted to show with like the communities that I'm talking about in the book
Yeah,
and the music
definitely.
about that. It has its own identity within Britain. It's almost an alternative history of modern Britain in that sense.
Right.
Um, these people have experienced, whether it be based on race or class, or ethnicity and these kind of things. But that was kind of what I wanted to show. But yeah, Cornwall,
Mm.
yeah, is
Yeah, I
a
felt like I got to know a little bit of it, even though it's not technically part of Wales, like you said, with that identity and Welsh independence and those kind of things. I did feel
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
appreciate that I got to know a little bit. I've heard people say, and they seem like they're always defensive, and they're mostly always white. They'll say, in England, racism is not as much of a problem as class, which I'm sure is complete BS.
Mm,
But like, but you did such a good job. Like I did see how, and obviously racism is a huge problem in England. You talked about some of the specifics of it, but I also did see how like you massaged it, I guess you finessed it very well about how class, like I didn't really know what that meant as
Mm.
much. And I think you did a really good job with with all the stories, all the individual stories, you really get to see what class means in these certain
Yeah.
parts of England. And of course, it's only it's three cities, it's not the whole country, but I
Mm.
feel like I got a much better understanding of that. I wonder if you learned anything about class in
Yeah, no,
reporting
I
this
did
book.
actually. I think class is so baked into British society, which is yeah, it's like entrenched into British society in that way. Even in the way it's spoken about, like I feel
Hmm.
we're going, and I wasn't really something didn't really have a grip on growing up because I feel like I've more come from like a lower middle class background, and then going to uni for the first time, and then you're meeting people whose parents are rich, whose parents have businesses or these
Hmm.
kind of things, and then you start to see um how class operates in that way. Or you meet people some people whose parents only one parent had to work, and because
Uh-huh.
one parent made enough money to all of these kind of things, so you start
Right.
to see um other parts of like the class system that you're not necessarily exposed to,
Hmm.
and how much it'd be spoken about in you in these places as well was also a big eye opener too. And I think that kind of opened my eyes to class. But I think it wasn't something I did intentionally. Like I
Mm.
knew that I was the music, of course, comes out of working class communities. So I knew that was going to be just inherent in the stories because a lot of the people are working. Most of the people in the book are working class. So I
Mm.
knew that was going to be an element of it. But it's probably when I went to Wales that I learned the most because you have like I think be class will be different depending on where you live. So like London being the capital city, um, you can be a working class person or a middle class person or someone who's really rich. But I guess the although the opportunity may not be the same, the just the what is in front of you is maybe the same if that makes sense.
Sure.
Like
Yeah, yeah.
I know people who have come from working class backgrounds and then gone to amazing schools because just because the schools are next door, if that makes sense. So you're
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, these kind of things. Or obviously London is the epicenter of in the UK of like business, music, culture. So you're exposed to all of these things growing up, or you can see them growing up.
Hmm.
You can get the train to galleries, which are free, although a lot of people won't do that. But
Ah.
in Wales, in the more rural parts, you start to see class mixed in with the regionality aspect of it. There's a
Mm.
chap about the South Wales valleys and a guy called Luke, and
Mm.
he's talking about being from a place where there isn't like visible, very visible signs of other things you can do with your life because everything is so far away. Like
Mm.
Cardiff, let alone London, like Cardiff is far away in itself. So there isn't the exposure to opportunities and things like that. So that taught me a lot about class in terms of
Mm.
how it operates on a regional level too and on a national level because he would say stuff like he didn't know private school was a thing until he got to uni and stuff
Mm.
like that. If you're in London or in Birmingham, you may not go to private school, you may not be able to afford to go to private school, but
Yeah.
you know of their existence at least. And it kind of reminded me of the Southwest Valleys. I was saying recently that I went to America. I went to Charleston in
Mm.
South Carolina, and that was kind of the same feeling, like very rural, more rural place than I'd been to, like before I'd been to New York, Atlanta, which
Okay.
big city, and then
Sure.
going to Charleston, which was a bit more withdrawn. You start to see like how I guess everything isn't on your doorstep.
Mm.
Um, in the same way. And I think then if you add like an economic factors into that, that of
Hmm.
course it's very difficult for
Mm.
people if you have like the same economic level of access or same money that someone who's middle class or upper class has.
Mm. You in the book you go back to South London, obviously big city, but sprawling areas, and you talk about Cadet and just about how like grime and rap kind of fuse and also kind of sprout their own wings and just really interesting ways in which they come together and also kind of separate and kind of
Mm,
evolve or move on. Um, and so we obviously get to know him a lot more as the book goes on. But
mm.
it's interesting too. You talk about like Despa, like he kind of grows up or feels like he has to grow up, and he works at Apple. Like
Yeah, yeah,
classic
yeah.
like corporate desk job, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like he's not loving it, but he's making some money. He feels like, oh, I'm more grown up. You talk about Krept and Conan, who seem like a big time duo,
Mm,
right? And they're just one of the things I was so struck by in the book is how much vulnerability so many of
mm.
these artists show. Conan had that horrible shooting in his family. I want to say his stepdad was killed,
Yeah, yeah, stepdad.
right? And but they inspired like Stormzy. He
Mm,
quit his job, like, hey, I'm gonna do music full time, and eventually Cadet. More people being inspired with like with the Astro Boys, and they're kind of like their South Wales anthem, and they do Broke, and other people are like, hey, we can put, our place on the map, whether it's South Wales, South London. Um, so Despa, I guess, right? He goes into the, I don't want to say the podcast space, or he does this meet the artist on YouTube. And
Yeah,
that's where
yeah.
I saw a lot of that vulnerability. And you were talking
Mm,
about how you got to meet JK and Daps like in the quote unquote golden hour. I wonder about
yeah,
like meet the artists and how, their vulnerability showed, and about how you got to kind of, identify or really speak with these guys like on a personal level. And not just you, but like the whole country started to see these guys in that way.
yeah, yeah. No, definitely. I'm just gonna I can notice this light is like creaking. I'm not sure it's gonna interfere with your audio, but I can just take it out real quick.
Yeah, no
If
problem. All good.
about
All
you.
good.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's all good. I didn't hear a thing, but obviously because you had it on mute.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, no, JK and Daps. I think such a big thing that came out of reporting all of these stories is because, as I said, because the music wasn't like didn't make money for a very long time. So
Yeah.
until 2014, 2015, the music wasn't viable for a lot of people. So you have a lot of people doing it out of passion now and out of the hope of what could be and the dream of what could be,
Mm-hmm.
which forms a lot of those early stories in the book. And a lot of the stories in the book is fueled from that. People chasing a dream that doesn't necessarily seem attainable, and the human toll, the emotional toll, the social toll that takes on you as you do that. And I think being able to speak to them about that, I think provided gave a lot of depth, but was also a commonality between them. So when I'd start to speak to, even before I started the book, some of those interviews come from like reporting that I do for journalism.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to notice those themes of what the sacrifice people were making for something that may ultimately not pay off. So you have people quitting their jobs and they have children to look after, but they have
Right.
like this random thing that they want to make music. That was the case for Despa. That was the case for Daps on the Map, both from
Mm-hmm.
the West Midlands, and similar situation with JK2. So hearing people pour out those stories was quite humbling in a lot of ways, and you can't like not respect them for taking that risk and
Yeah.
gamble in their lives. And I think also kind of reflects like the gambles a lot of their parents and grandparents took in that same way.
Mm.
So there's an inherent like DIY thing there. But that was like quite special and quite powerful to hear because I think it shows like, as I was saying, the big aim for the book was to show that what had gone into this moment of the music blowing up and people now being able to become millionaires and win award
Mm-hmm.
shows awards and be on GQ front cover, Vogue front cover, all of these
Mm-hmm.
different things. There was a lot of sacrifice and a lot of stories of people who you may not hear about that actually helped build that ground for them. And
Yeah.
used someone like Stormzy from South London, who is one of the maybe the big one of the biggest artists in the country now, regardless of genre. You
Mm.
see like the deep history of music in South London and the deep history of people in South London who had been building these scenes quietly before like they had emerged onto a
Mm-hmm.
national stage. And that was something I wanted to show like how connected someone like that is to everything that's come before him. And someone like Cadet, who was friends with Stormzy, is connected to that history too and is a living testimony to that history as well.
Yeah. I early on in the book, Wikipedia'd, if that's a verb, I Wikipedia'd Cadet, and I was
Mm,
so upset to see that, he was killed in an auto accident. And
yeah,
you let us know about his background. You let us know, like I said, about that hustle, about that DIY, about his, even doubting himself,
yeah,
but also
yeah.
saying, hey, like I forget the stadium, I'm gonna be here in 2 years, or
Mm,
someone, people telling him that, like, you know, um, and then he did make it big in some ways, and he definitely made it big, unfortunately, more so after he died. There
mm,
was a tribute show. You said it could have been millions of dollars in fees for like what 25 acts that were part of
yeah.
it. But I mean, it was a beautiful thing, and then obviously, unfortunately, it was after his death. But I wonder what his legacy is, what he made from his career, and how he'll be remembered.
Yeah, that was such a difficult story to write in that sense because yeah,
Mm.
he's another person I'd been listening to for years and years and years and
Yeah.
years. And his music always had like has a real vulnerability in it, like a stark vulnerability that you don't necessarily hear in music in general. I think there's always
Mm.
two kinds of vulnerability in music, and especially rap is like there's vulnerability on the level of I'm telling you like what's happened to me.
Okay.
There is still sometimes like a bit of like bravado of like I overcame this still,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
then like to a complete next level of like not only have I been on the receiving end of these things, I've also done these things that I'm not proud of, or
Huh.
relationships with his mum, with his father, with women and whatnot, with his family, and that stark honesty, or goes to a space where a lot of men don't talk about like the real deepest kind of vulnerabilities they face when it comes to relationships or things with
Yeah.
their parents and whatnot. So it was like a stark level of introspection I hadn't really seen before, and
Mm.
that was something he was really known for at the time. And he would write these really personal stories and songs and put them out for the public to hear, which of course made such a big impact because
Hmm.
everybody navigating through some kind of personal difficulty or something or relationship in their own life which they could relate to. And so and then he started to I guess the flip side of that is, as we say, like sometimes that music doesn't always sell as much as
Mm.
um contemporary pop, more pop leaning rap.
Yeah.
And so he started to make some of those songs, and he started to essentially a few months before he died, he had a one of those songs blow up in a genre called like Afro Swing, which was a kind of mesh of rap,
Mm.
Afrobeat, bashment, and um that song blew up, and now he kind of is getting his just dues in that sense. And then
Mm.
he unfortunately passes away. But I really wanted to tell that story because I felt like his life is such a living testimony to the music and to the power of the music and to the legacy of the music. I think you start from his family history. I trace that to his family history of he's the
Mm.
third generation of his family now living in Clapham and Croydon in South London, which I think is quite a powerful thing in itself. And then so he's inherited these genres in a sense, like doing grime was as natural as breath almost. And that's what I wanted to show about the cultural
Mm.
element too. And then but also then I remember when he passed away and the kind of shockwaves that sent through the everybody who was a fan of the music and whatnot. And then of course his family too. But I remember seeing just how celebrated his life was. His friends started a football team for him at, of course, a
Yeah.
sold out show, which I tried to go to. I couldn't get tickets to because they
Oh.
sold out quickly. Um, and then at Glastonbury, when Stormzy headlined Glastonbury, the first, I think the first British rapper to headline Glastonbury, I think the first
Mm.
solo act headline Glastonbury as well. Like he has a tribute in his set to Glastonbury, into Cadet in his set at Glastonbury. So when I was seeing all of these different things, I was made me think that he, on a communal level, not just a music level, on a community level, like he's somebody that's deeply touched people and
Mm.
is now celebrated by his community in the same aspect. So I wanted to show that as well, that how deeply he had, not only was he linked to his community, but had been celebrated by his community
Yeah.
and his community too. And to also show then how much community is a part of the music as well. Like there is a real culture that the music comes from. And I think his life was a real testimony to that, because he essentially used music to change his life, to heal his relationships with
Mm.
his family members, and change the lives of thousands and thousands and thousands of other people in the process.